Well, hello there. Welcome into Drummer Daily. I'm so glad you could join me, my friend, back again. This is episode number 137. And as always, or almost always, I am sitting behind my drum kit as I record this, so I get extra amounts of inspiration to talk about all this stuff. Speaking of inspiration, I'm going to get back to all of the questions, the awesome questions that many of you have sent in that you'd like for me to cover here on the podcast. I'll get back to those in a couple of days. By the way, if you want to submit your own question, feel free to do that. Send me an email at daniel@danielhadaway.com, and I'll do my best to work in your question into an episode of the podcast. But something hit me the past couple of days, and I thought that I would kind of cover this over the next couple of days of the podcast. So I've got today, and then the next episode that comes out, episode 138, will also be kind of part 2 of the same kind of thought process. And it all involves, several years ago, my wife and I tried to open a coffee shop. And the reason why we wanted to open a coffee shop was a few different reasons. But the big things were we really like coffee. We like being entrepreneurs. We like the lifestyle of being an entrepreneur, being your own boss. And we, the biggest thing was we loved making coffee. We love making coffee for other people. We love serving coffee to other people. We love all of that. And so we thought, hey, why not open a coffee shop? And it seemed really cool, and owning a coffee shop seemed like a really cool idea. And so we kind of went down the road of doing that. So we, started applying for a business loan, and we found a location, and we started sourcing all of our supplies. We started looking at, machines, espresso machines, and all the equipment that we would need. We wrote out a business plan. We did the whole thing. We were going for it. And I mentioned we scouted locations, and we actually discovered this one location that was like the perfect location. It was going to be the best location. It was like just obvious. This is like the perfect place for a coffee shop to be. And the area needed a coffee shop. There was all these reasons why it was a perfect location. Well, kind of as we went down the road of trying to open this coffee shop, this location was so perfect that it started to become really hard, and I dare say impossible to imagine the coffee shop anywhere else. It had to be at this location, which was a great motivator and was wonderful until that it became obvious to us that that location was not going to work. They weren't basically willing to rent us that location. And so it kind of fell through. The whole location fell through, and it kind of messed up our whole dream of opening a coffee shop. It was like, oh, well, that was really exciting. It was going to be really exciting to open that coffee shop there, but now that we can't get this location, it's not so exciting anymore. And we eventually kind of lost interest, and we moved on to other things. Now, basically what I've discovered in that process, and when we realized looking back on it, years after the fact now, was that we might have had a dream of opening a coffee shop at one point, but quickly that dream morphed into fantasy. And it became a fantasy because the idea of what the end goal was going to be started getting more and more and more specific. And the only way it was going to work was if it was this in this location doing this thing exactly. So we didn't really have a dream of opening a coffee shop anymore. We had this idea of doing this one very specific thing that we wanted to do. Now, and I find that's pretty common amongst many of us as drummers as well. The difference between a dream as a drummer would be, I want to become a professional drummer, or I want to play for a successful country artist, or whatever it is. Something like that. Whereas a fantasy would be, I want to be the drummer for U2, or I want all of the original members of NSYNC to get back together, and I want to be their drummer. Something like that that's very specific. And I'm not saying those things are impossible, but I'm saying by tying our success to that specific scenario, we've embraced a fantasy and not a dream. And we've artificially and unnecessarily limited our ability to achieve that by making it so specific. And another way to tell if what you've got in your own mind is a dream or a fantasy is if one little detail changes, then is the whole dream messed up? Does it not seem like it's worth it to you anymore if one thing changes? It's okay to have a dream to want to make a bunch of money being a professional drummer, but if you're going to die and also, drive a Ferrari, let's say, or whatever, but if you can't get the Ferrari and you can only get a Mercedes, does that not seem as appealing to you anymore and not worth it? Well, then maybe that's a fantasy. That's not really a dream. That's not something your soul is crying out for. That's something a little maybe less meaningful to many of us, but also it's just not as rich and as deep, and it's not going to drive you to succeed. Now, my wife and I, we still would love to open a coffee shop someday, but we've realized that it doesn't have to be in that one specific building, that one specific place. It might be somewhere else someday, but the big key that we had learned was that if we're going to tie all of our definition of success to a bunch of different factors that all specifically have to be met, then we are living in the world of fantasy, and we're not looking for a dream, which means that we're not actually going to have a good chance of achieving it. So I want to ask you, as a drummer, are you making goals and having dreams that are actually dreams? Are you saying, I want to become a professional drummer? Or are you being so oddly specific that you are unnecessarily limiting your chances of success? And is one of those details changing going to ruin the whole thing for you? And if so, maybe that's not a dream that you should be pursuing. I'm not saying you don't pursue drumming. I'm saying you need to reassess your dreams and really look at what you really want deep down inside. Another telltale sign, by the way, of a fantasy versus a dream is that a fantasy doesn't really have a specific path towards success, whereas a dream, you can at least see some steps laid out in front of you to pursue to make that happen. So that's part 1 of 2. Like I said, tomorrow's episode is going to cover part 2, and part 2 is going to cover why I think that even if we had opened that coffee shop where we wanted to, that we probably would have failed anyway, and how that relates to what you can do right now to become a professional drummer. What are the things you can be doing right now to become a professional drummer? So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. But thanks for joining me today, and I'll talk to you again, hopefully tomorrow on Drummer Daily. Bye for now.